ऊपर से भारत कैसा दिखता है आपको?
जी मैं बगैर किसी झिझक के कह सकता हूँ कि सारे जहां से अच्छा।
Hello and welcome to the Times of India Gold podcast. That was the iconic conversation between Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and India's first man to orbit into space, Rakesh Sharma, in April 1984. But before this happened, India had already achieved the impossible. In 1963, it sent its first rocket into space from a little-known fishing hamlet in Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala. It did this from the back of a cycle, using a church as the launch pad. We will bring you the dramatized recreation of the story of the first rocket launch in two parts. This is part 1.
This is Project Command. Stand by to power transfer. Time is X minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
This little known but equally iconic moment for India happened on November 21 in 1963. It was India's first baby step into a space program. And it was spearheaded by one of the brightest scientific minds in India, including Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, Dr. Homi Bhabha, and Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, besides, of course, several others. The year was 1962, and two of the world's biggest superpowers, the United States and the USSR, were in a race to space. Back home, India was struggling to deal with the realities of independence and development. A space program seemed too far away. But not for the big boys of India's scientific field. Both Dr. Homi Bhabha and Dr. Vikram Sarabhai were keen to set up an indigenous space program. Dr. Bhabha had already been entrusted with the Department of Atomic Energy with the mandate to conduct space research and peaceful uses of outer space.
Hey Sun, do you know who called on Dr. Homi Bhabha today?
नहीं तो तू बता. You are the junior officer in his office.
Harry, it was Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. Can you imagine? They were talking of a space program, that too for India.
What are you saying?
Yes, and he was telling Dr. Bhabha that now that UN has included India as a member of its Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, India can get the technology for its first launch from NASA. Isn't that exciting?
In fact, it wasn't just NASA that helped India. NATO ally France also pitched in, and more interestingly, arch enemies USSR also stepped up. But before that happened, Dr. Sarabhai had to find the place from where India's first rocket could be launched. The approximate location wasn't hard to pinpoint. The south of India, or more specifically, Kerala was the ideal place as the magnetic equator was known to go through here. Dr. Sarabhai's young colleague E.V. Chitnis had narrowed it down to two places, Velanatharuthu in Kollam and Thumba in Thiruvananthapuram.
Hello, Dr. Pya Pishroti. I think we can go ahead with Velanatharuthu for the station. Don't you agree?
Do you know the meaning of Velanatharuthu? Velanna means white elephant, while Thuruthu means a sandbar.
What? No white elephants, please. The government will not like it, neither will the UN. No, let's look for an alternative.
And that's how the second option, Thumba, became ground zero to create history. But why was the proximity to the magnetic equator so important? That's because rockets can more easily reach satellite orbits if launched near the equator, as this maximizes the use of Earth's rotational speed. That's why launching from the equator makes the rocket or projectile move faster once it is launched from near the magnetic equator than from anywhere else. The magnetic needle is the most horizontal here, meaning the pull is the least. That is also the reason why today most of our launch stations are located near the equator. Here's what V.P. Balagangadharan, a former scientist and author of books on the Indian space program, has to say.
Actually, Thumba was the place identified for starting the space program because of its geographical advantage. Many countries did not have a place very close to the geomagnetic equator, which India had. So when INCOSPA decided to have the space program in India, the whole South India, the coastal regions of Kerala, was looked for a possible place, and Thumba was identified as the place. Later, Thumba evolved as an international station for launching rockets from many other countries.
There was a small problem though, as Dr. Vikram Sarabhai explained to Dr. Homi Bhabha.
It's the perfect location. There's an airport close by in Trivandrum. The population density is low since it's a small fishing hamlet, and there's also the possibility of quick rescues from the sea in case of booster failures.
So what's the problem?
There's a church exactly where the station will come up.
It wasn't just any old church either. The St. Mary Magdalene Church, an imposing red stone building, was dedicated to Mary Magdalene, the woman to whom Christ first appeared after the resurrection. Spread over 600 odd acres, the church was the soul of the small fishing community of Thumba. The shrine was supposed to have been built by St. Francis Xavier in 1544, starting out as a simple thatched shed. Soon, negotiations began amid murmurs of discontent. The scientists, led by Dr. Sarabhai, met Bishop Peter Bernard Pereira to convince the fishing community. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who was part of the original team that worked on the Thumba project, recalled in a lecture in 2003.
I clearly remember it was a Saturday when Professor Vikram Sarabhai met the bishop. The bishop smiled and asked him to meet him the next day, that is Sunday. In the morning service, the bishop told the congregation, "My children, I have a famous scientist with me who wants our church and the place I live for the work of space science research. Dear children, science seeks truth by reasoning. In one way, science and spiritualism seek the same divine blessings for doing good for the people. My children, can we give the gods a board for a scientific mission?" There was a chorus of amen from the congregation, and the whole church reverberated.
The fishermen, though, wanted the church building to stay. They wanted permission to conduct worship in the church. The authorities could not oblige, but the church was kept intact. In fact, the sandalwood statue of Mary Magdalene was kept where it was, above the altar, hovering over young scientists like a guardian angel. It later became a museum and a library.
I tell you something ironical. The St. Mary Magdalene Church housed the first office of the Thumba Space Center. That was the church where I had my design center, started rocket assembly, design a filament binding machine for FPP product, and the bishop's house was our scientist's place.
Whatever religion doesn't matter. It is unthinkable that any place of worship in this country will be given to developing science or technology. Just unimaginable, but it was done that way. So that itself is symbolically, I would say.
Dr. P.V. Manoranjan Rao, a veteran space scientist and former group director of the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, calls it unimaginable, and the only space program that started from a place of worship. Soon, the work to launch the first sounding rocket from Thumba was underway. Sounding rockets are the very first rockets sent out by any space program. They test and study electrons for research in the fields of physics, astronomy, and meteorology. They are the baby steps that lead to the setting up of a full-fledged space program.
Essentially, you know it, and maybe you read those things. See, sounding rocket, it's called sounding because not because the sound it produces. Okay, it's called sounding rocket because it is used to probe or sound certain regions of the atmosphere. Okay.
You were listening to a Times of India Gold podcast. Tune in to the next part of the two-part podcast on how Thumba, a small fishing hamlet in Kerala, became the epicenter of India's space program. Ashwin J. Kumar also contributed to this story.